I don't know if many of you would have seen the article in Wednesday's Age where there was an article and a picture of Dandenong Primary School students, years 5 and 6, who were practicing meditation and breathing and mindfulness before doing maths. Boy, I wish I had have had that opportunity when I was at school. I can remember the feelings, and the symptoms can be crippling. A thumping heart, butterflies in the stomach, a sweaty palms, as Mr. Dudley barked out mental arithmetic problems to solve. And if you got it wrong, he yelled at you because he was a major in the Australian Army in World War II. And everything he said was a barking order. I think I can trace back my anxiety to that time. At a very basic level, of course, we're failing to reduce the global burden of mental illness. We only have to look at our own country and our own state of Victoria to see the depth of the problem of mental health in our community and the lack of funds to provide the treatment that is called for. A recent survey of 21 countries with more than 51,000 respondents found that approximately 10% of the population of those countries had a diagnosable anxiety disorder in any given year. That's an astounding rate of clinical anxiety, which translates, of course, into widespread suffering with insidious consequences. Anxiety is associated with problems in educational and workplace functioning, impaired relationships, and reduced quality of life for the sufferer. If we look at Australia, it is estimated that 45% of all people will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. And in any one year, around 1 million Australian adults have depression, and over 2 million suffer from anxiety. We know around 1 in 35 young Australians aged between 14 and 17 years of age experience a depressive disorder, and 1 in 7 young Australians experience a mental health condition. And if you break that down, 13.9% of children and adolescents aged between 4 and 17 experience a mental disorder between 2013 and 2014, which is the equivalent of 560,000 Australian young people. And in 2015, 1 in 14 young Australians, 6.9% aged between 4 and 17 years of age, experience an anxiety disorder that is equivalent to over 278,000 young people. Now, when I was working as chaplain at Wesley College, I know that anxiety among students was our number one student problem. And it was right down in the junior school, in the primary years, as well as up in the senior school. And on average in Australia, 1 in 4 people, that's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men, will experience anxiety at some stage of their life. So anxiety, of course, is more than just feeling stressed or worried. While stress and anxious feelings are a common response to a sometimes difficult or pressured situation, they usually pass once the stressful situation has passed or the stressor has been removed. Anxiety, deep anxiety, is when these anxious feelings don't go away, when they are ongoing and happen without any specific reason or cause. It is a serious condition that makes it hard to cope with everyday life. And everyone feels anxious, of course, from time to time, but someone experiencing anxiety to that degree and level, these feelings aren't easily controlled. We live in an area care, fast-paced, tech-obsessed, the sky is falling in kind of world. And the earlier treatment is sought, recovery can be facilitated more completely. Last Sunday, I briefly mentioned the fact that my wife is dying of a stage 4 GBM, tumour of the brain. I know what anxiety is like. That was way back in 2016 she received that diagnosis. The prognosis was 12 to 15 months. We're now in the 29th month of her cancer. And because of the brain injury, she can't walk or stand anymore. She cannot use the left side of her body, and she lives in a high care residential facility in South Oakley. And for someone who's been married, it seems strange that I live in one place and she lives in another. At first, I looked after Catherine at home after the operation, but by Christmas 2016, it became apparent that I could no longer do this without help. And you can imagine my anxiety levels going through the roof when I discovered that to have 2 carers looking after Catherine in our own home just for 5 days of the week, and because of OH&S regulations, it was going to cost $16,000 a month just for those 5 days. Even so, moving, of course, now where she is in the residential facility, it still costs nearly $7,000 a month to keep her there. So you can see that I'm not someone standing up here pontificating about what you ought to do about anxiety, because I feel it and experience it every single day. We all know that anxiety or extreme apprehension and worry is a normal reaction to stressful situations. But in some cases, it becomes excessive and can cause sufferers to dread everyday life, as I've mentioned. The type of steady overall anxiety is called GAD, or Generalized Anxiety Disorder. Anxiety so frequently co-occurs with depression that two are thought to be twin faces of one disorder. Low-level anxiety, of course, is not always a bad thing. It keeps us on our toes, enables us to push past the paralysing self-doubt that we may have, and propels our creative endeavours to the next level. So this morning, very quickly, I want to offer you four ways of containing your anxiety. The first way is to hold yourself kindly and gently. That means to be gentle with yourself. Many of us raised in the Christian faith tradition find it a lot easier to meet the needs of others, to be kind to others rather than to meet our own needs and to look after ourselves. Virtuous self-sacrifice is deeply embedded in Western culture insofar as Christianity has influenced it. In one of his books, Carl Jung, the psychologist, wrote about the quote from the New Testament, doing unto others as you would have them do to you, or loving your neighbour as yourself. And Jung suggests that none of these statements has anything to do with being nice. And the second point is that both are equations rather than injunctions. And if we are to love our neighbour, we are obligated to love ourselves. When we fail or don't achieve what we need to, or we find ourselves in situations where anxiety levels rise, we often beat ourselves up. We berate ourselves. We tell ourselves that we're not good enough. And all of these ways which increase our anxiety. So what would our lives look like if we cared for ourselves properly? What can I do to improve my health, expand my knowledge, strengthen my body, and be kind to myself as I am to others around me? So hold yourself kindly. The second way of containing our anxiety is to drop the anchor. Have a look at the logo in front. I find it interesting that the Uniting Church logo has an anchor in it. An anchor is a device normally made of metal that is used to connect a vessel to the bottom of the body of water to prevent the ship or boat from drifting due to the wind or current. Anchors achieve their holding power either by hooking into the seabed by their sheer weight and mass, or a combination of the two. An anchor is described as a way when it has been broken out of the seabed and is being hauled up to the ship's side to be stowed on the vessel. There are, of course, permanent anchors where a vessel is permanently sighted, such as light vessels or marker buoys. The anchor needs to hold on in all weathers, including the most severe storms. When our lives are under pressure and anxiety starts to build, we need to drop our anchor into the seabed of our faith. To drop our anchor into the seabed of our most valued and treasured and precious relationships. Dropping our anchor enables us to face the headwind and the strong currents of life, and to put our faith in the anchor that will hold us firm and to ground us. And the third way is to take a stand. If we were all given a piece of blank paper this morning, how many of us would be able to list the beliefs and values that guide our lives? Day-to-day living makes so many demands on us that sometimes it feels more than enough just to react as best we can to whatever happens, hoping that everything will turn out okay. Yet most of us have plenty of beliefs, values, or principles that are important to us, even if we're not aware of them. What gets you really fired up and angry? When that happens, it is often a sign that a principle or a value that we hold strongly to has been breached. We may even be surprised by our own passion and reaction that we feel within when that happens. Taking a stand on our values or principles gives us strength. They provide the foundations from which we find the power and energy to make a stand about the things that matter to us. Like the spokes of a wheel, our values or principles give stability and help us move forward in a purposeful way. Living our lives according to our principles and values and taking a stand that is congruent with those principles and values will enable us to reduce the anxiety because we have a direction and a purpose in our lives. And finally, the final way to contain our anxiety is to find your treasure. A lot of people still have that everlasting itch for things remote that invaded Ishmael in the book Moby Dick. Perhaps some of us would love to go out in search for a treasure that lies buried deep in an ocean cave or buried in some dark, forbidding jungle. To think about a hidden treasure is not just a pipe dream, of course, for some people. At the bottom of the world's oceans, slowly crystallising, there lie more than 3 million shipwrecks, all of which keep the treasures that sunk with them hundreds of years ago. Some in the shape of pristinely preserved pieces of pottery, others in the shape of gold or silver ingots or coins. Recently, I read a story of some American treasure hunters who had discovered an old shipwreck off the coast of Florida. The silver coins they collected from the bottom of that ocean and that shipwreck were worth $450 million. Of course, who owned it? You'd have to argue with the government, wouldn't you? So I put it to you this morning, what is your treasure? What is your treasure? Jesus is recorded by Luke, who once said, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What is it that you are passionate about? What is the treasure that you would give up all else to find? Could I suggest to you today that perhaps our treasure has something to do with our spirituality? It flows directly from our understanding of the human spirit. Spirituality is the outward expression of the inner workings of the human spirit. And in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, Dr. D.N. Elkins writes about spirituality in this way. He says, "Spirituality is a way of being and experience that comes through awareness of our transcendental dimension, and that is characterized by certain identifiable values in regards to self, others, nature, life, and whatever one considers to be ultimate." So the treasure is intrapersonal in that it refers to our own inner connectivity, our authentic self. It is interpersonal in that it relates to the relationships that we have with others and within the communities in which we live. It is transpersonal insofar as it reaches beyond self and others into the transcendental realms of human experience, which is beyond the mundane and routine things of everyday life. And while the human spirit may be deeply mysterious, pointing as it does towards aspects of reality that are deep, unfathomable, and transcendent, spirituality is a human activity that attempts to express these profound experiences and inner longings in terms that are meaningful for each individual. The form and content of spirituality, of course, is therefore diverse, contextual, and to a greater or lesser extent defined by its prefix: Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, humanistic, agnostic, and so on. Finding that treasure within yourself is a lifelong journey, but it will enable you to quell your anxiety and still your fears. And as you engage in your life as you leave here today, may you hold yourself kindly. Drop your anchor into those things that are important. Take a stand for those things you believe in and find the treasure that is deep in your heart. And perhaps as you together contemplate your future minister and ministry of this great church, treating yourselves kindly and gently, dropping the anchor into the seabed of what are the solid values of the ministry of this church, taking a stand for the ministry that is authentic and integral to St. Michael's, and finding the treasure, discovering the gold of the ministry of this church, St. Michael's ministry cannot do without. Blessings to you all. Thank you. And our blessing. As we part and go our separate ways, it is our prayer that you will give us, O God, an eternal presence, each in our own way, the passion for living and loving, the courage for daring and hoping, the freedom for growing and changing, the capacity for giving and receiving, the humility for learning, the tenderness for understanding, the strength for enduring, the trust for believing. And may your grace and peace, which is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of all that makes life whole, be with us and go with us. Amen.